The winners uniquely receive a $100,000 no strings attached grant, or rather prize from us.
Hey everyone, welcome to Housing Insiders, the podcast for founders, builders, lenders, and regulators, and anyone and everyone that believes everyone should be well housed. I'm Jonathan Lawless.
And I'm Jeremy Potter. On Housing Insiders, we're hosting those conversations you won't hear anywhere else about how to make housing more innovative and attainable.
And we're again proud to partner with Built Rewards, who's bringing you these smart conversations. I'll continue to encourage folks, and thanks for those who have sent them in. But if you have an idea for a guest or a topic for a show, or particularly if you're interested in sponsoring an episode, please email us at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com.
And thank you for listening to this show. If you like our podcast, please give us a review and spread the word. That's how we can make more of these. And we really want to dive into all the topics this year. So please share and review our show. We tink you for that.
And I am completely thrilled about this episode. We have joining us today, close friend and colleague of mine, Jenna Louie. Her title today is Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer at Ivory Innovations. I think titles at small organizations never really sort of speak the truth of how much work Jenna really does. One of the hardest working people I've ever met, and just really has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in housing innovation. So it's great to have her with us. Ivory Innovations, for those that don't know it, is a not-for-profit. They have a prize that they run every year. I'm actually on the advisory board, so it's a great opportunity for me to see what's happening, get to work with people like Jenna all the time. Every year they evaluate, literally hundreds of ideas that come through, working in partnership with the Echo School of Business. And Ivory, the construction company, is the biggest builder in Utah. Clark Ivory, just an incredible individual, really has put a lot into this organization to kind of identify great organizations doing cool things in housing.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, the Ivory Prize has been running for 7 years now. And every year we look at hundreds of innovators, as you said, John, across the 3 categories of construction and design, finance, and then policy and regulatory reform. Each year, it is fascinating to see the kinds of ideas and solutions that are popping up all over the country. Some of these, have been long-standing ideas, and so we'll look at innovations and solutions from big established organizations who have a new program that's really novel. We'll also look at small startups. We'll look at public sector entities, say cities or states that are launching new programs. It is one of the most fascinating prizes, I believe, out there in the industry when we think about housing innovation and supporting the newest and best and most promising ideas to help change the systems we work in.
That's so exciting. Having worked in innovation and new product development at Rocket Mortgage, I can tell you firsthand how difficult it is, whether it's an established entity, like you said, or a startup, to get that kind of socialized support from the entire industry. The validation and credibility that the Ivory Prize offers just accelerates new ideas to such a degree, because you're constantly running into these barriers along the way, trying to do new things. And so we have a ton of innovators that listen to this, a ton of people who will benefit from hearing about what's going on. And I share John's excitement to be able to talk about the finalists and then also celebrate, your organization, Jenna, because that is one of the ways you get new ideas into the world, is with that credibility and the validation that, people need to see to invest in it and build it out.
Thanks so much. Well,
Yeah.
maybe with that, should we dive into talking about some of these innovators?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. So we're announcing the top 10, which is super exciting. We finally pared back the hundreds of people that have kind of come in down to 25 and now down to 10. And Jenna, it's going to be awesome to kind of talk through them. Before we get into the specific individual organizations, Jen, I'm just kind of curious to get your perspective. I know I kind of have had my own looking at it, but you've been involved in the prize committee for 5 years now. So anything stand out for you in terms of this pool of applicants or where housing innovation is trending? Any sort of macro observations in terms of this year's pool of candidates?
I think one of the really interesting trends that we've seen over the last couple of years is just the impact of interest rates. You can say that it is true across the broader housing ecosystem, right? Of everything that happened in 2020 and following for the next couple of years when interest rates were close to zero. The kind of tech, the kinds of solutions that you see, we're really taking advantage of that moment in time. Fast forward, interest rates start rising, and you see a lot of companies who had raised money in a very low interest rate environment say, oh, shoot, maybe my business model wasn't as strong as I maybe had hoped it would be. Or maybe originations were where I was making all of my money, and those have dried up overnight. And so I'd say there's some big macro trends that mirror probably everything that everyone else is seeing in the industry. I think when it comes to innovators, what that has really meant is the strength of public sector ideas has become more ascendant over the last couple of years. As you see venture capital money dry up, as you see some private financing just get a little bit shakier, a little bit more hesitant, really, I've been excited to see nonprofits and then particularly public sector entities, say cities or states themselves, really step up into a gap that had maybe for the last decade or so been more traditionally filled by VC or private firms. So we're still seeing a ton of innovation coming from startups and from tech ideas, but it's a question of who is necessarily leading those innovations. And it's not always a small startup out of Silicon Valley like it used to be. Sometimes those ideas are being incubated by other entities, and that is a truly exciting thing to happen.
That's awesome. And then before we jump into the first category, construction and design, talk about sort of who's made it to the top 10, maybe just a word on the process. How do we get from 200 to 10? What does that process entail?
So every year we open up nominations for the Ivory Prize. Anyone listening to this podcast, please make note. We would love to hear from you in September. We typically run those nomination calls from September through December, and then the spring semester, because we work a lot with students at the University of Utah. So the spring semester from January through May is full of diligence and whittling down those applications to 25, then 10, then ultimately 3 winners, one in each of our categories. And so this year, for example, we had 283 nominations, our biggest pool yet. From that, we go through a diligence process of trying to understand the minimum, kind of the basics of each of those organizations. And it's really important to our philosophy at Ivory Innovations that we make our application process the easiest thing possible for the innovators who are doing the hard work out there. This is not your traditional grant application. This is not filling out forms. We just want you to get on a call with us for half an hour, tell us your story, and then our students and our team will take the hard work off of you in trying to make your case. And so we put together memos internally. Those go to a panel of judges, one of whom is John Lawless. So thank you, John, for serving on our advisory board. And those advisory board members are experts pulled from across the industry, from finance, from construction, from policy. You see that we are echoing our 3 different categories. And they help us select down from that 283 down to a top 25. Those are typically announced in February. We then announce our top 10 in April, and then ultimately our winning organizations in May. And so it is a quick turn process every year. We take the summer off, and then we start it all over again in September.
Being a part of the process, I can really say to all of our listeners, if you're interested in doing anything like this, definitely look at how Ivory does it. One of the most impressive things outside of team members like Jenna is the students at the university. I mean, they really put a lot of time and effort into talking to these organizations, learning about what they do, and preparing amazing materials for advisory board members and others to kind of go through and really understand what these companies are doing. So an amazing process. And so with that, no more delay. Let's jump into construction and design. And in no specific order, let's talk about who's made it to the top 10 from that category.
So there are 4 total finalists in our top 10 group from the construction design category. 2 of them are, I would say, really, really focused on software, and 2 of them are more focused on kind of a grassroots movement as we think about what does the future of development look like in this country. So let me try to take them one by one. Our first top 10 finalist, just going alphabetically, is Gensler's Conversions Plus program. So probably many of us have heard of Gensler. It's a worldwide, very well-known architecture firm. And they've got a really interesting software platform called Conversions Plus that is trying to help landlords across the country and across the world, really, figure out whether they should convert their office buildings into housing. And so I think some of the stats that they've shared with our team is that 20% of Class A product in most major cities is sitting vacant. And that general vacancy, according to CoStar, has risen from something like 9% to 13% since 2020. And so I think, anyone who's looked at a downtown corridor recently would say that makes sense, right? The return to office movement has been slower. It's been different depending on where you are. And so Gensler's Conversion Plus program saves landlords a ton of time in analyzing whether a building would be a good fit for conversion or not. Is this the right kind of load bearing aspects here? Do we have, the right number of bathrooms to actually turn this into apartments? Like, how do we start thinking about those things? And so their program runs through 150 different variables to try to get that answer much faster than, say, a bunch of analysts sitting poring over blueprints.
It always piques my interest when I hear something like that because we know there's broad interest. And so that's a really cool use of technology to save, the experts time and money as they analyze that.
Yeah, I was thinking. I actually had a chance to talk to Stephen Painter, who's one of the guys who works with the Gensler team, and just great. And Jeremy, you would have really enjoyed how just the data and the information that these guys had, because I think we were just sort of generally skeptical. Can you turn office space into housing? And we even heard in our last podcast, just how hard it is to do, especially for more modern buildings. And if you add to all of that, like you have to try it and then see if it works, then it's really hard. But the ability for this technology to really just assess it and figure out whether or not it'll work, I think is a real game changer for developers and office holders. I mean, it's just going to take a lot of the guesswork out, and if it's doable, it'll be doable, and if it's not, it's not. And that'll just make it way cheaper for cities and others to invest in that type of conversion.
Well, and speaking of making it cheaper to build, I'll actually move out of alphabetical order, but to the other organization in this finalist pool that has a lot to do with software. And so this organization is called Reframe Systems. They're based out of Boston, and they are using really advanced robotics technology and automation to make home building more efficient, more cheap, and more affordable. The founder is a guy named Vikas Enti, and he actually got most of his professional experience with Amazon. And so he was one of the people in charge of figuring out how do you automate Amazon warehouses so that, when you press buy on your whatever widget you're buying from Amazon that day, that order is actually fulfilled, in the 2 days that you're supposed to get it. And so that takes a huge amount of infrastructure and tech on the back end. And because a few years ago, took all of that know-how and is now applying it to the home building process. And you think of how complicated it can be to build a home, whether it's in a factory or whether it's on site. Some of the same methodology, some of the same infrastructure and ideas that can underlie how do you really efficiently move part from place A to place B within a warehouse can also be true for home building. And so they have built a super sophisticated factory outside of Boston. They have piloted an ADU already in the Boston suburbs and are scaling up very quickly through the use of micro factories to be able to build more across the country. And so, really excited to see what they're doing with software. And it's another example of how do you take technology and apply it to an industry that has long lacked that kind of sophisticated application, at least from a construction and design perspective. How do you take some of the best ideas from other industries and apply them here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that Jeremy, you and I have talked about a lot is like, even though we are doing homes in factories, when you actually visit those factories, as impressive as they often are just like what you're doing on land, just done inside, and it's just sort of maybe a little bit more of an assembly line version of what's just done. And so what was really interesting here is this idea that you could use robotics in a way to make that kind of modular construction or whatever type of construction. Like robotics should be a game changer in terms of reducing costs, being able to run 24/7, that type of thing. So really kind of an interesting company. Congrats to Reframe for making the top 10.
Agreed. I mean, it's one of the biggest challenges that I heard when I talked to people at the Housing Supply Summit. The last time we were all together a few weeks ago was there, and that was one of the biggest things. How do we stop either wasting time or materials on the way it's always been done and bringing that, especially the Amazon mindset, but that efficiency and manufacturing mindset? That's really exciting to hear. So good for them.
Amazing. Well, I'll move next to the two other organizations in our top 10 group for construction design. And as I mentioned, both of these I would say are not software focused, not robotics focused by any stretch of the imagination, but much more kind of community based. And so the first is the Incremental Development Alliance, which is an amazing nonprofit. It's based out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. And they are supporting small scale real estate developers with workshops to help those folks build more missing middle housing across the country and generally kind of naturally occurring affordable housing. And so they define small scale real estate developers as folks who are building less than 20 units a year, kind of 0 to 3 stories. So you think of a lot of infill housing around the country. These are not your skyscrapers, these are not your big multifamily projects. These are kind of your small mom and pop shops springing up around the country. But as we know, so much of the country's housing stock and so much of our real estate, right, is actually these kind of small scale buildings. And so the Incremental Development Alliance trains people and helps them with the skills and resources and partners to actually get those projects off the ground. And so by better equipping folks in their own neighborhoods to help convert whether underutilized or old buildings into housing, is making a real difference. And they've trained over 8,000 folks over the last couple of years around the country, and have had some real wins thinking about just the impact of having that kind of that workforce and those people that are aware and able to build housing. They're also having a lot of success in the public policy arena with changing codes. And so, some of the most exciting upzoning wins on a kind of city by city level have been some people from the Incremental Development Alliance's alumni network. So, really excited to see them. And then the other group that I'll mention just really briefly is the Lower Sioux Indian Communities Hempcrete program. And so, also thinking about kind of a non traditional group that is moving into housing. The Lower Sioux Indian community is outside of Minneapolis, and they're the country's only vertically integrated hempcrete builder. So, they're doing what they call a seed to wall building, so growing hemp on the reservation, processing it there at a factory on the reservation, and then building homes actually with that hempcrete for people in their community. And so, a really interesting vertically integrated process that I think those two finalists together are a fascinating example of what small scale development can look like, right? When you take community members who are looking at the issues that they have, how do I make more housing possible in my community? Well, what do I have nearby? What partners can I tap? So both of them are doing incredible work.
Agreed. I think, Jenna, that brings up a really key aspect of housing, which is you want to scale the success, what works, the models that work, but the people that know their community the best are the people in that community. And so if you can enable the community to provide or to capture, I should say, the best practices across all these different ways, and or just have them give themselves the best outcome for their housing, that's when you really start to see sustain, like, long lasting wins. And that's really cool. Also, I just am really curious someday to see a hemp house, because I think that's awesome that they found a solution they themselves provided. It's so cool.
It's very cool. If she's listening, I had a chance to talk to Allie at Incremental Development Alliance, and she is a powerhouse. What's really incredible is that organization is just boots on the ground, changing little things to enable development. And she said there are a lot of people out there advocating for big change. We're the group of people that's advocating for little change, little developments, learning about what the obstacles are on the ground. And to your point, Jeremy, when you're on the ground working with developers, working with the community, you just know exactly how to fix what needs to get fixed, and that's what they've been doing. So maybe at some point we'll get Allie on the podcast too
Yes.
to give us her perspective. And we'll also I want to post Jenna, remind me, is it Patagonia that did the video of
Hmm.
yeah, so
Yeah, the
for
hempcrete program.
the hempcrete program. Yeah, so we'll post a link to that too. It's a truly inspiring look into what that group is doing, which is really awesome. Let's take a quick break, hear from our sponsors. We'll come back and go through the remainder of the winners. This episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. Built is a rewards program, just like an airline program that is centered around your home and neighborhood. But instead of earning miles for flying, Built rewards you for paying rent no matter how you pay. As a member, you can earn points at over 20,000 local restaurants, local merchants, and those points are now the most valuable rewards currency. You can use it to book travel, on Amazon, or even towards a down payment.
Built is revolutionizing housing. If you want to learn more, email John at lawless@builtrewards.com.
Welcome back to Housing Insiders. We're talking with Jenna Louie of the Ivory Prize. Jenna has just announced the 4 finalists out of 10 that are, these 4 were in the construction and design category. That means we have 6 more finalists in 2 more categories. So we're super excited not only to hear everything we've just learned about the Ivory Prize and these 4 finalists, but now we have 6 more innovators and good ideas to discuss. So Jenna, it sounds like we may want to go with finance next. So why don't you take us through the finalists in the finance category?
So starting alphabetically, Future Proof is one of the most interesting groups I've had a chance to talk with in recent years. They are working in the complicated and highly regulated world of insurance. And so Future Proof is fascinating. I am not an insurance expert, let me say that straight out, but what they're doing is incorporating much more data, much more sophisticated data about property resilience into underwriting in disaster prone areas. And so they're working in Florida, they're expanding into California right now. Of course, we all know that those are places that are regularly hit by natural disasters. And probably the most interesting piece of what I've learned from Futureproof and what enabled them or what brought them into our top 10 finalist group is how they're thinking about bringing new types of data, even things like from the MLS, right? We have a lot of data about properties, but it's not always traditionally used in underwriting, right? These are different systems that don't talk to one another. To say nothing of there are old climate models that all insurers are not necessarily using. And so Futureproof is pulling from a huge number of different data sources to try to put together the most comprehensive look and really allow homeowners that have low risk properties in high risk areas to benefit from essentially that arbitrage that they can see through future proofs models that another insurer wouldn't necessarily see. And so an insurer might say, well, every house in this area has burned down recently, or your risk level is really high. And future proof might go in and say, well, actually, what we can see from the different models that we're running and the different data, and we're using more updated looks at your property. It's actually you have a really resilient property. We agree that your neighbors are all very, very high risk, but you're actually slightly lower risk, and we're going to price that in for you. And so by doing that kind of data analysis, they're essentially pricing in the moral hazard of allowing people to incentivize them to make resilience upgrades and kind of harden their properties in a way that allows them to benefit from that on a property insurance level. So they are one of our finalists. It's been really interesting understanding more.
Very different, and the one of the reasons the advisory board really liked this one was just this idea that if you build your home more resiliently, you'll save on insurance, which hasn't, because insurers don't usually consider the types of building materials that you use or other aspects, that connection hasn't been made. And so, a lot of our thinking is that if that were more of a discipline, like you'd have less people moving into disaster prone areas, but if they do, you certainly want them to move in and build in a way that makes them more resilient to whatever disaster might be a problem in that area. So that very, very interesting. I also don't understand the insurance the way they connect to the industry, but this idea of like using more data to understand resilience is really, really compelling.
Well, the other thing, John, is you talk a lot about incentives and how do we align incentives around behavior that we want to create or behavior that we expect. And we know with consumers, if I think I'm going to get something in my pocket for doing it, I think of that like if you're a safer driver and you let us watch you drive around with our little device, you'll save on insurance, right? Because we've determined you're safer. And that kind of personalization, I think, of the incentive works really well. Jenna, it also reminds me of a friend in Colorado who decided to take proactive measures to make their property more resilient, particularly to fire risk. And it started kind of like a positive peer pressure where then the neighbors wanted to do it too because they saw the success or sort of understood that a neighbor was taking the right steps, and it kind of spread in a good way through the neighborhood. And so I think that's the other incentive, to use that word again, that we could see with a model like that. So very exciting stuff.
It is. It really is. And there's so much more to be learned from talking to the Future Proof team. Some really smart people with a lot of PhDs who could definitely say more about it than I can. Let me mention the two other finalists in the finance category briefly. One is the Grounded Solutions Network Homes for the Future Fund. And then the other is also a fund model. So I'll do them together. It's the Housing Accelerator Fund's Industrialized Construction Fund. And so, what they're doing with both of these models is finding ways to make capital available for parts of the industry that have not traditionally had it readily, there. Grounded Solutions Network, Homes for the Future Fund is fascinating. It's a shared equity model on a single family rental portfolio in kind of dispersed areas across the country. But by providing a shared equity kind of aspect to this, and by using a creative ground lease model, they're allowing for home ownership opportunities for families that are making 80 AMI or below on a kind of delayed process. And so generally, we've seen a lot of rent to own models over time, and we've seen a lot of shared equity models over time with the Ivory Prize. What we really like about this is that it's taking the best parts of models that we've seen over time, right? So you can have a lower income person pick a house of their choice, get into homeownership or get into a really stabilized rental opportunity, and then eventually convert to homeownership. But what's fun about this is that it's leveraging some of the best parts of the single family rental model, right? The just market rate single family rental models when it comes to operations, maintenance, can you take care of a distributed portfolio? And it's combining that with some of the best parts of community land trusts, which is actually what Grounded Solutions Network really has made their name and their expertise in. And so by putting those two things together, you have homeownership opportunities for low income families that otherwise wouldn't exist. And so, kind of, between years 1 and 7 of someone living in that home, they have the opportunity to convert to homeownership and then to stay in that home long term and then to ultimately resell that home while maintaining the affordability aspects. Again, that part of that community land trust aspect. And so, you have shared equity that's allowing people's homes to appreciate and giving them that upside while also providing opportunities for Grounded Solutions Network to keep that home in an affordable portfolio long term using some of the best parts of market rate single family rental operations that they're bringing in. So it's just, it's one of the most interesting ones.
Yeah, that's a topic we talk about a lot here on Housing Insiders, and one I really expect to be the foundation of the future. I mean, that sounds like, we talk about the complexity of housing all the time. We think about the complexity of housing all the time. So solutions are going to be somewhat complex, but that one's elegant because people will understand that. I love when those that we're trying to help residents and homeowners be able to access something that is pretty, commonsensical, even if it has some legal complexity. And I think that's really cool. I get really excited when I hear stuff like that.
And then to say a little bit about the Housing Accelerator Fund's Industrialized Construction Catalyst Fund, that one is a little bit more simple, let's say, than the Grounded Solutions Network idea. But the Housing Accelerators Fund it's an organization based in California, specifically in the Bay Area, and they've been looking really carefully over the last couple of years at what stops kind of volumetric modular projects from taking off. Of course, California has some of the highest building costs in the country, especially when you think about affordable housing. It's up to $1 million per key. And you can lower some of those costs if you're using offsite construction methodologies. But what's become clear, even as that industry has stood up and there have been some really marquee projects that have found success, is that the drawdown schedules for financing an offsite construction project are just so different than a traditional site built project. There's a lot of deposits that are needed up front. Banks are traditionally uncomfortable with these because they say, well, you just took half of the project cost and you gave it to this factory. How do I even know that that factory is going to be operational in 6 months when your units need to be built? I have nothing, to prove to me necessarily that, that project is going to exist with half the money out the door. And so the Industrialized Construction Catalyst Fund is really designed to help cover some of those gaps and provide a bridge. And so they're using it as a revolving loan fund, essentially for those pre-construction deposits, and just kind of greasing the wheels on a part of the lending ecosystem that isn't as yet built out to make those projects possible. And so a little bit simpler if you're familiar with industrialized construction drawdown schedules. And if not, just know that it's a really important part of the ecosystem to make sure that those projects can get built using the newest methods possible.
John and Jenna, one of the things I wanted to ask, because it sounds like these two funds and probably the Development Alliance in the construction and design category are focused on enabling others, enabling those people in the community or with established models and investors. And so I think that's a unique, obviously, we'll find out who wins in May. But in the meantime, those innovators listening, those developers listening, these are the types of solutions you could be thinking about tapping into because they're enabling you to go do what you need to do. And I think that's a really cool feature of the prize. Some of these are looking for direct to market customers. Others are looking to enable those in market. And it sounds like those three in particular have that. Is that safe to
That's
say?
extremely well said.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, both, and I think Jenna said it right of the last two we talked about. It just, these are sort of parts of the market that nobody's been enabling. And it's not that they lack profitability, by the way. I mean, both of them are different. The Grounded Solutions one is, well, we need a subsidy to be able to create community land trusts. Like someone somewhere has to get cheaper land to create a land trust. That's how they work. If nobody's offering that, you got to go create your own. And they figured out a way to do that. they could make money off of the single family rental portfolio, take that money and equity they built and turn it around and use it to fund a nonprofit. So it's basically like they're enabling themselves in some ways, but creating a profitable business to enable a nonprofit business, which is really an interesting sort of change in the way you kind of think about it. And then, certainly we talk about industrialized construction all the time, and somebody's going to figure out that if we are going to become a nation that builds homes this way, we're going to need a financial system that enables it. And, just right now it's 4% of the market. So you don't have people out there providing financing the way it needs to be done. And these guys are showing that it can be done. And I think ultimately in the long term, it'll be done in a very profitable way, and everybody else is going to be wanting to do the same thing. So it's great that they're kind of taking a leadership role and sort of shaping how this gets done.
That's right.
All right.
Well, I
One more
think that brings
category,
us
huh?
to
Yeah.
our final category, policy and regulatory reform. And so I'm excited to announce that we have three public entities, as I'd mentioned at the beginning of the episode, really the ascendancy of public entities and stepping up as innovators. And so our three finalists in this category are the City of Muskegon, LA County, in a partnership with the UCLA's Policy Lab for an AI homelessness prevention program, and then the state of Florida and the Florida Housing Coalition for some recent legislation called the Live Local Act. And so between these three, you have public entities doing very different things. We can start with the City of Muskegon. They are using tax increment financing as a
Look
tool
at how
to
Jeremy's
redevelop.
lighting up. Jeremy's so excited.
Go
You got
Michigan.
Michigan.
That's right. The late spell, the next bell. Here's where we go.
No.
There we go. And so, yeah, the city of Muskegon is a really interesting one. Jeremy, you're going to have to tell me if you've ever been to Muskegon. I have not, but they have a lot of brownfield, essentially, opportunities in their city. That the city has found a way to use tax increment financing, or TIF, to actually redevelop those properties, sell them at affordable, actually below market rates to home buyers in the city. And then over time, the way that the tax increment financing comes into play is that the city is made whole because of the rising value of those properties, given that they had sold them as homeownership and those properties are now appreciating, relative to the alternative case, which is that property continued to sit vacant, was undeveloped. No one was living there, and there was no property tax increase. And so basically, the city has found a really creative financing tool. They're using a statewide law that already existed and applied it to a program in their own city that has converted hundreds of homes into affordable homeownership opportunities for Muskegans. And it's really a model that we hope many other cities and states across the country take a look at.
Jeremy, you talk about this all the time. We talked about it in very early episodes of our podcast, is that you could think of housing just as a part of the economy, or you could think of it as I use the word again, enabler of the economy. And if you take a bigger view of housing and think about what it can really generate, then that creates a lot more value than just what you're thinking about relative to housing on its own. And so that this sort of program, I knew would not only be exciting for you because it's Michigan based, but also because it has that mindset. It realizes that a vacant piece of land generating no tax, it's much better to provide some subsidy to that, so it becomes a non-vacant piece of land that will generate tax in the future. And I just love that they had that sort of insight and that it's actually working really well.
Yeah, this will be one to watch, because I think a lot of particularly upper Midwest cities, but as you said, Jenna, cities across the country. Well, when I talked to somebody recently in Detroit about development for single family housing, one of the things they said that they thought the city could do that would be the most impactful was simply prep the land, get it ready in a way that was publicly efficient and effective for then private industry to come in and do what we do. And so I think this is a great one to watch, and it could be one of those models that can scale.
Have you been there?
Absolutely.
I have not been there.
Yeah, okay. The next time I'm out there, let's do a road trip out there.
Housing Insiders road trip, please.
Yeah, we'll put you in touch with Jake. He's running the program for the city of Muskegon. He's awesome. I'm sure you
Great.
all would hit it off.
Excellent.
Okay, well, without further ado, our last two finalists, we can talk about LA County and UCLA's program next. And so this is one that has gotten a little bit of press, and I think for really good reason. It's one of the first kind of AI-based prevention programs for homelessness that we've seen in the country, really kind of with at scale in a proven way, helping to prevent folks who would otherwise be, let's say, likely to become homeless, sending a subsidy in advance to people so that they have the money to pay off, medical debt? Is it just getting current on rent? Is it, whatever it might have been, a car payment? Finding ways to help them before they need to access the full social safety net. And so, without going too much into the AI model, there's a lot behind it, but essentially UCLA and the County of LA have pulled together some of the most important data, right? So who is accessing some parts of the social service network? How are they doing financially? A whole bunch of different variables. And by taking those, they're able to run a predictive model that says, wow, okay, yeah, family A is likely to fall into homelessness. We see a high predictive score. So what they're doing is actually proactively reaching out to that family and saying, hey, we can provide a subsidy of a couple $1,000s. And by doing that, you avoid someone actually becoming homeless, that family actually falling behind on rent, getting evicted, and really getting off their feet. And so by using the predictive analytics side, it takes a lot of data, it takes a lot of sophistication, and the LA team is aware of that. They're also very eager to share their story and their model with others who are excited to deploy this in other parts of the country. And really, there is no good reason why others wouldn't be able to adopt this, right? If you can get the data together, you can save so much money. We know that homelessness is not necessarily a profitable part of the industry, right? There's sort of the moral aspect of what do we owe to one another, and we owe people help. But there's certainly a way of saving the public sector money if you're able to address, with a smaller dollar figure, people who would otherwise be needing a lot more social support if they are actually in a shelter later on. So just really, really interesting.
Yeah, the saying "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure" comes to mind with these, and we see this in so many different industries, and that one particularly with healthcare. But like, this is the first group that I think has really figured out a way to prevent homelessness earlier on. And you can do a lot to provide money if you can find the right people to give it to, and it would be way cheaper than dealing with somebody who ends up being homeless. And it's been really impressive to watch how they've been able to identify data and indicators to figure out exactly how to target money to prevent homelessness versus dealing with the consequences of it.
Yeah, hopefully this is what gets our audience excited about hearing about Ivory Prize and these submissions, because we just heard housing as an economic engine for communities in a submission, and now we're hearing it as housing as healthcare, which we know it is. We know that stable housing does have these downstream economic and downstream health benefits and health outcomes, and this is a perfect example to John's point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You couldn't have said it better. Well, to take us home, the final finalist in this category is the state of Florida and Florida Housing Coalition being recognized for the Live Local Act. And so the Live Local Act has also gotten some press across the country. To give a brief overview of what it does, the act mandates that local governments allow by right residential development in commercial, industrial, or mixed use zones, provided that at least 40% of the units are designated as affordable housing. And so it's a really interesting combination of by right zoning, along with specific tax benefits for developers, including property tax exemptions and sales tax breaks, along with direct funding for housing initiatives. And so it's one of the first acts that we've seen to fully preempt local approval processes by eliminating the need for additional zoning changes or discretionary reviews when those affordability requirements are met. You get automatic development rights in these commercial and industrial zones. And, we've talked a lot at the Ivory Prize and on our team about what is the future of upzoning. We've seen so many different iterations of that across the country. And I'm sure John and Jeremy, you have talked about many of them yourselves. This is one of the most interesting ones coming out of Florida, I think purely for how broad-based the powers are. And the Florida Housing Coalition has been a really interesting partner for the state of Florida, essentially serving as the technical assistance. And so helping local counties, local jurisdictions figure out, what does this mean? Helping developers figure out, what does this mean for me? And I think they have Florida Housing Coalition has talked with at least 84 jurisdictions, trying to, help build more housing, and they've seen some incredible results so far. We often talk about just because you pass a policy, it doesn't mean that, that policy comes to life. But they've seen already multifamily developments going up in a whole bunch of different places. It's one of the most impressive acts we've seen from state or local government in a while when it comes to moving the needle.
I think Secretary Turner just a couple of days ago came out and said, regulation is a big barrier to building new homes, and using that term regulation as a catch-all for things local and federal and everything. Florida's just taking the bull by the horns here, and again, very aggressively figuring out how to upzone housing. We've seen it in some cities. Now we're seeing it in Florida. And I think already the evidence is there that if you do it, you're going to like the results. And Jen, I don't even know, but we probably didn't even ask them this question, but like, I don't think anybody's complaining about the outcome. Like nobody's worried about, oh, wow, there's too much housing here now. I think the things that NIMBYs are often worried about have not really been borne out to be true and sort of what Florida's doing.
Yeah, I think in talking with the Florida Housing Coalition team, there's some jurisdictions that are all in, and there are some jurisdictions that are dragging their feet. But I think the broadly positive move, I just found my notes. It's 104 projects with many thousands of units coming online underneath that, at least 31,000 units just in the first couple of years of this act being live. Those are numbers that are really hard to argue with when it comes to the fact of we need to address the housing affordability crisis. We need to find new ways of doing that. And to your point about Secretary Turner, but we need to make this easier. We need to get out of our own way to make it possible to build housing.
Well, congratulations to both of you, to the Ivory Prize, to the other judges as well. The top 10 is amazing. This is truly inspirational. So thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about when the finalists are selected? What do they get? What is the winning package look like, and how do they benefit?
Great question. So any finalist from our top 25 group and up receives four main benefits from our team. So one is exposure and access to our network of folks, going on podcasts like this and telling their stories and introducing them to the listeners that would not have otherwise met these organizations. We also try to provide funding connections to folks who are raising money, whether it's philanthropic dollars, whether it's venture capital money or elsewise. We provide sponsored interns. So those same University of Utah students that John mentioned, we think they're great, and we provide them with paid summer internships to work at some of these organizations where there's a good fit. And we also do pro bono research and consulting work across the year. And so if an organization has a strategic question that they're trying to address, we try to give them staff and student time to help them answer that. The winners uniquely receive a $100,000 no strings attached grant, or rather prize from us. And the aspect of it being a prize is really interesting because it means we can give that money to almost anyone. We can give that money to an entity like the city of Muskegon, let's say, if they're our winner this year. We can also give it to a startup or to a nonprofit. And so that's the difference for the three winners. But otherwise, our top 25 and our top 10 and our winners have access to all of those four benefits where we want to support and scale their work equally.
And Jenna, Ivory, the builder, has also, in the construction and design world, has been willing to take some risks or partner with some of the folks in construction and design. So Ivory's done some pretty impressive things there. You want to talk a little bit about what you guys have been up to?
Yeah, thanks so much for the reminder. We have what we call the Innovation Fund in our work in building actually both affordable housing units in Utah as well as market rate single family homes. And so, as John mentioned, Ivory Homes is the largest builder in Utah, traditionally known for a lot of single family master plan communities. We also have a nonprofit called Ivory Innovations as well that is actually building capital A affordable, generally townhouses and multifamily across the state of Utah as well. And so between those two different housing typologies, we have the opportunity to pilot with some of the best innovators in the country. And so, for example, if it's hempcrete, right, and if that's the thing that we want to try, we have the ability to put some of that innovation into practice and to use our dollars as a family foundation and as a nonprofit to really try to bridge that gap between this is a great idea that is piloted to this is a great idea that is at scale. And so trying to put that into place, whether it's for construction and design, when it comes to those homes, whether it's financing, right, and trying to make some of these projects pencil and using new models or bringing some of these organizations to Utah. And also on the policy side, trying to bring some of the best ideas to the Utah legislature and seeing if it sticks.
It's so cool. What a unique organization. It's such a joy to be a part of. Jenna, it's been so awesome to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show and talking about and bringing to life the top 10.
Thanks so much for having me.
And so that does it for this episode. Again, we'd love to hear from any audience members. Send us an email at podcast@thehousinginsiders.com. If you like what you hear, how about leave us a review?
And as we always say, hit subscribe so that more of our episodes get to your feed, and share our episodes with those that you know will appreciate them. Thank you, Keenan Chen, for the music.